Hello, I'm Aimee Barnes, a senior advisor to the California-China Climate Institute, and we're delighted you've joined us for the celebration of our 2-year anniversary today. The Institute has grown significantly since our founding in September 2019. Since then, we've worked to advance subnational climate action between the US and China through research, training, and dialogue. We have built collaborations across jurisdictions between researchers, policymakers, and civil society. We have found there is a strong commitment for climate action among states, provinces, and cities in the US and China, and we'll hear about some of these innovative actions and partnerships on today's panel. Before I get started, I wanted to share a few quick housekeeping notes. Today's discussion will last approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes, and we hope we'll be able to keep you with us for the remainder. We have enabled simultaneous interpretation. So at the bottom of your screen, please select the globe icon to select your preferred language. And throughout today's discussion, if you would like to direct any questions to our speakers, please enter them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to someone who really needs no introduction, Institute Chair Jerry Brown. He was a multi-term governor of the state of California, where I first worked for him and where he advanced some of the most ambitious climate policies in the nation and the world. Governor Brown's leadership spearheaded opportunities for direct collaboration between California state officials and Chinese counterparts, leading to the advancement of formal cooperation between the two regions and leading to the founding of the California-China Climate Institute. Governor Brown, over to you.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure, and I think very significant that we're now celebrating our 2nd anniversary. It's been 2 years since we were founded in New York with the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, present. And since then, we've had many meetings with our Chinese counterparts. So this is a very bright light in the midst of some very difficult times between the people of China and the people in America, and between our two countries. In the Institute, which we call the California-China Climate Institute, we are working together. We are working at the subnational level, but we also work with national leaders. We've had John Kerry, we've had other people from Washington, as well as officials from China itself. Local, state, and even national. Minister Xia for one. So this is an opportunity, it's a means, it's a meeting of people who are concerned about climate. We're in an age of increasing nationalism, and these feelings run very strong, run strong in China and also run strong in the United States. But there is a larger perspective that both countries share, and that is we are citizens, we are inhabitants of the planet Earth. We are global members of the same humanity. We depend on the same atmosphere, the same set of living systems, which are under threat by certain impacts of our modern technology, which give us great benefit, but also have negative consequences, and therefore must be corrected. In the field of climate, we are working diligently at the level of research, the level of training, and at the level of dialogue and communication with our Chinese partners. And I do this in a spirit, not just in what's good for America or what's good for China, but what's good for the whole world. The common threat of climate disasters, the fires in California, which have occurred just not too many miles from where I'm right now, the flooding in China, the hurricanes in other parts of America, all this indicates the reality of a changing climate. And this constitutes a threat to people in many parts of the world. So it's a common threat, creating common vulnerability, creating a common interest. And it's that commonality of interest that we at the California Climate Institute emphasize. We're working to advance knowledge, to advance our understanding and our ability to come up with programs to operate those programs to reduce carbon emissions, to increase the capacity to capture through natural lands the carbon emissions that do occur. We've got a big agenda, a big threat, not only in reducing from the carbon emissions and the great heroic effort needed to reduce those emissions to net zero as quickly as possible, but also to invest in the adaptation necessary. We're gonna have to build seawalls. We're gonna have to manage the forest better. We're gonna have to take care of our subways. So many things have to be done in China, in California, in the United States, and throughout the world. This requires enormous investments, trillions of dollars. Those investments won't occur, won't be made unless the understanding is there. And this institute is committed to fostering that understanding, to pushing back the frontiers of knowledge, sharing that knowledge in the common endeavor in what I call planetary realism, working on common threats in our common interest, California and China, the US and China, and in fact, all of humanity. That's what it's about. Nothing bigger, nothing more heroic, and nothing more important. That's the way I see the California-China Climate Institute.
Thank you so much, Governor Brown. Thank you for your remarks and for all you do and have done for California and for our climate and for the future of our planet. Next, we'll hear from Institute Vice Chair Mary Nichols, who served as chair of the California Air Resources Board under 3 different governors. Few people have had more influence on advancing California's climate leadership, as well as climate action around the world. Mary was one of Time 100's most influential people in 2019 and has often been called the Queen of Green. Mary, over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Aimee. At the California-China Climate Institute, we're advancing research, training, and dialogues to help build momentum on the low carbon transition and carbon neutrality planning. We see many opportunities for California and Chinese cities and provinces to work together to advance these goals. Subnational action between California and Chinese provinces and cities is effective because both regions are uniquely positioned to have massive impacts on greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So the size and the scale are significant. At the Institute, we also believe that US and Chinese provinces and states don't have to work entirely in tandem or jointly in order to achieve important benefits from being part of the Institute's work. In other words, the dialogue and the exchange of information are key, as is also some degree of coordination along the way. In fact, competition between the two on clean energy transition, for example, may be quite helpful in furthering climate action and could help the deployment of climate solutions at national scale and drive down costs. China and the US can spur innovation and continue to change the economic calculus for decarbonization. Collaboration can also take many forms, but at a minimum, it requires communication, transparent and shared milestones to gauge progress, regular dialogue and exchange, and a shared understanding of our research, development, and deployment priorities. We also need coherent international leadership. At the Institute, we're working to create these opportunities for coordination. Our upcoming work includes undertaking a mapping of subnational actions in both areas to try to help the exchange of information achieve a common language of understanding, as well as promote coordinated efforts across the Pacific. And we continue to prioritize and highlight the potential role of cities and counties and other subnational entities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And it's just such a pleasure and an honor to get to be emceeing this conversation today with so many people that I have worked with and for and have a great deal of respect for. And our next speaker is no different. We'll now hear from California's Lieutenant Governor, Aimee Kounalakis, a native Californian. She is the first woman elected Lieutenant Governor of California. Previously, she served as the United States Ambassador to Hungary. And I was lucky enough to meet her at a fundraiser a number of years ago, after which I read and would highly recommend her autobiography, Madam Ambassador, 3 Years of Diplomacy, Dinner Parties, and Democracy in Budapest, which begins with a riveting story about boar hunting with the head of the Hungarian Armed Forces. Lieutenant Governor, thank you for being with us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Aimee. Thank you for that kind introduction and for helping me sell books. Good evening to everyone joining from California and around the United States. And to those on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, good morning to our colleagues in China. It is truly an honor to be with you today to celebrate the second anniversary of the California-China Climate Institute. As we know, climate change is a global crisis. No state or nation will be left untouched by its impacts. The California-China Climate Institute exemplifies the type of cross-jurisdictional collaboration that is needed to address the scope and magnitude of this crisis. California and China represent two of the largest economies in the world and two of the largest carbon emitters in the world. Scaling up the solutions needed to decarbonize our economies will require collective action. This institute serves a critical function by bringing people together from California, China, and around the world to accelerate climate action and to foster cooperation. I'd like to extend a special expression of gratitude to Governor Jerry Brown. It was his vision and his passion that brought this institute into existence, and he continues to be one of the strongest and most important advocates for collaborative climate action. And to Mary Nichols, the former chair of the California Air Resources Board, Mary is an enduring icon of environmental leadership and a true visionary. I proudly serve as Governor Newsom's representative for International Affairs and Trade Development, a position established in California by executive order. Working together, the governor and I have identified three major international priorities for the state. They are trade, immigration, and climate change. While trade and immigration policies are largely set by the federal government, we have substantial opportunities to engage at the subnational level. And when it comes to our climate agenda, our opportunity to engage is even greater. With the passage of the Federal Clean Air Act in 1970, California gained the authority to set our own air pollution standards. This authority was recently challenged in the courts, by the way, and successfully defended by the Newsom administration. But this ability to set our own emission standards and the environmental protections that followed now span decades, administrations, and political parties. Through the leadership of Governors Newsom, Brown, Schwarzenegger, and Davis, as well as many leaders in the state legislature, California has set ambitious climate goals and implemented some of the most aggressive policies to cut greenhouse gas emissions. I'd like to briefly highlight a few of them for you today. In the power sector, we established renewable energy mandates requiring a certain percentage of energy to come from renewable sources like wind and solar. These targets have ramped up over time as costs have come down. Our current goal is to power our state with 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045. We are well on our way to achieving that goal. In 2019, over 60% of California's electricity came from carbon-free sources. California also established ambitious greenhouse gas emissions targets. In 2006, under Governor Schwarzenegger, we set a goal of reducing our emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. We met that goal 4 years ahead of schedule. We then upped the ante in 2016 when Governor Brown signed a bill establishing a new target, reducing our emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. We are on track and more committed than ever to reaching that goal. In 2018, also under Governor Brown's leadership, California was the first state to establish a goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. In the years that have followed, we have seen many countries, including China, step up and pledge to become carbon neutral by around the middle of the century. Our state has witnessed the worst fire seasons on record over the last few years, along with devastating impacts of severe drought. Climate action is more urgent than ever for our future, and Governor Newsom has risen to the challenge. He has called for a phase out of oil and gas extraction in the state. He has worked with the Biden administration to identify areas off our coast for offshore wind farms. And most importantly, he's called for all new car sales starting in 2035 to be zero emission vehicles. With over half of greenhouse gas emissions coming from transportation in California, Governor Newsom has recognized that our only course of action is a bold call to end the era of the internal combustion engine. If there is any state in the United States which will lead the transition from gas-powered vehicles to zero-emission vehicles, it is California. California is home to over 600,000 zero-emission vehicles and over 40% of all electric vehicles nationwide. We are also home to the largest hydrogen fueling network in the country. All these actions point to one clear conclusion. When it comes to climate action, California's leadership is among the most steadfast, stable, and reliable in the world. We have signed over 60 international agreements, and we are committed to continuing to share best practices and learn from others. California's work with China is one of our best examples of this commitment. Over the last 10 years, we have signed over 20 memoranda of understanding with China at the national, provincial, and municipal levels. We have shared best practices on cap and trade, clean energy, zero-emission vehicle policies, and air pollution. In 2018, at Governor Brown's Global Climate Action Summit, California and the Ministry of Ecology and Environment signed an MOU to further strengthen and coordinate efforts to combat climate change, promote clean and efficient energy, and while protecting public health, the environment, and natural resources. Governor Newsom and my office have also engaged in this cooperation directly. My first official trip abroad as Lieutenant Governor was, in fact, to China, where I represented California at the Belt and Road Conference in Beijing in April 2019. The purpose of my visit was to address climate change as a standalone issue and to highlight our ongoing work to advance environmental protection together and to call for China to prioritize the climate agenda in all aspects of BRI. I'd like to close my remarks by recognizing that on a national level, the United States and China have many challenges that our leaders are working to address. That is why we congratulate the Biden administration for its appointment of Secretary John Kerry as the Special Envoy for Climate. By setting the issue of climate change apart, the pathway is clear for us all to work together to do what's right, to combat a common threat, a threat to all our families and all of our children. Thank you again to the California-China Climate Institute for hosting these important discussions today and for their ongoing work in fostering global collaboration as we move together towards a decarbonized future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, and thank you for all of your leadership on climate and across a number of issues in the state of California. We really appreciate having you here with us today. Next, I'll turn it to Louise Bedsworth, Senior Advisor at the California-China Climate Institute. I was lucky enough to serve alongside Louise under Governor Brown's administration. And in the vein of recommending reading, I highly recommend a piece that Louise published today in The Hill entitled "Equity is Key to Resilience: 3 Ways to Make It a Priority." It's my honor to invite Louise to now moderate our session on US and Chinese subnational climate action. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Aimee. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening to everyone. Good morning, excuse me. Thank you for joining us for this event to mark the 2-year anniversary of the California-China Climate Institute. I'm thrilled to now be a part of the Institute, which I joined earlier in the summer, and continue the work that's underway here. In this session, we're going to focus on the important role that subnational action has played in advancing climate policy around the world. For the past 2 decades, mayors, governors, and other local leaders have really been at the forefront of tackling climate change. We've seen cities and states and provinces go out ahead on sector-specific policies, as well as setting economy-wide targets and emission reduction goals. And then increasingly, as Governor Brown noted, we're seeing cities and states and provinces on the front lines of the changing climate just this summer, managing the extreme events that are occurring with greater frequency and greater severity around the globe. In many cases, this subnational action has really set a standard and led the way for future federal action. And that certainly has been the case in the work that California has done, really since the 1960s in tackling air pollution. And we know that subnational action can be a big contributor to helping countries meet their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. So this morning, I'm very excited to be joined by a really amazing and knowledgeable group of panelists who will provide their perspectives on subnational climate action. I'll provide a brief introduction to each of these panelists and then turn to them to provide some opening remarks. And then we'll open it up for some questions among the panel and then from attendees. So please, as was noted, put your questions into the Q&A and we should have plenty of time to get to them over the next hour. So our first panelist is Taryn Finnessy, who is the Policy Director at the US Climate Alliance, a bipartisan coalition of governors committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in alignment with the Paris Agreement. At the coalition, Taryn supports the Secretariat's policy team in creating comprehensive policy solutions to advance states' climate and clean energy priorities and help set coalition-wide strategy. Prior to her role as the policy director, Taryn was a senior policy advisor at the Alliance, working on short-lived climate pollutants and other important topics. Previously, Taryn also served as a senior climate change specialist for the state of Colorado, so she brings with her the experience of working on the ground at a state level as well. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Taryn and then I'll introduce the other panelists before they speak. Thank you, Taryn.
Thank you, Louise. So I'm Taryn Finnessy. I'm the Policy Director with the US Climate Alliance. Good evening to those of you in the United States and good morning to those of you in China. Thank you for having me here. For those of you who are not familiar with the US Climate Alliance, we were formed in June of 2017 by a small group of US governors, including California Governor Jerry Brown, who committed to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement in response to the previous federal administration's decision to withdraw from this international accord. Since then, we have grown exponentially. We now include a sizable and bipartisan group of governors from states across the country, with our most recent addition, Governor John Bel Edwards of Louisiana, joining in May of this year. Our coalition as a whole now represents 61% of the US economy, 57% of the US population, and 43% of US emissions. With that large of representation, we now are a large enough share of the economy that through smart coordinated action, we can actually begin to move markets, bringing down the cost and increasing the availability of access to resilient zero carbon products, services, and practices. And it's starting to work. From 2005 to 2019, Alliance states cut our greenhouse gas emissions faster while continuing to grow our economies, producing higher levels of economic outputs than the rest of the country. We did all of this while creating over 130,000 new clean energy jobs and building resilience to the impacts of climate change that our states are already seeing on the front lines. While we've made progress in cutting our greenhouse gas emissions to date, more work needs to be done to put us on a pathway consistent with what science tells us we need to really avoid catastrophic climate change impacts. Thankfully, we now have a partner in the federal government, and we can start to shift our focus from backstopping federal rules and defending challenges to critical climate policies and regulations to instead advancing foundational and leading edge climate policies, including driving collaborative multi-state actions that can also help grow our economies. Together, our alliance states have built a foundation of ambitious climate action that provides durable roadmap for national policymakers and the Biden administration. And in the last 10 months across the suite of proposed and finalized federal climate actions, many can trace their roots to actions pioneered by alliance states, including those in California, from clean cars to HFCs and green banks to the 30 by 30 conservation goals we're seeing adopted at a national level. Our states are testing, refining, and implementing next generation climate policies so that we all can go further, faster together. And as we look ahead, we will continue to build on our collaborative approach, forging new partnerships and connections and seeking new opportunities to build on our communities of learning and share our experiences with other like-minded subnational leaders. This fall, we plan to have a delegation of governors at COP26, who will be echoing the importance of a whole of government and multifaceted approach to advancing climate solutions and sharing the solutions that have worked in their states, as well as learning from the solutions that have worked elsewhere around the globe. The work of entities like the California-China Climate Institute are really instrumental to our governors as they look to bridge that divide from innovative research to practical application. They're also really important for expanding those subnational dialogues around the world and complementing our own tracking efforts as we look to expand and take deeper dives into the work of subnationals and identify opportunities for replication, both of the work that our states have done and things that have happened elsewhere that our states can then replicate. So thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Taryn. That was really helpful to hear from you. Next up, we're going to hear from Zhu Xiaoming, who is the director of the Yangtze River Delta Carbon Neutrality Strategy Development Institute at Southeast University in China. Director Zhu previously served as the director of the Reform Commission of Jiangsu Province and the director of the Bureau of Statistics in Jiangsu Province, and she was the mayor of Zhenjiang City. Director Zhu has long been engaged in development planning, regional economic and industrial policy, and low carbon strategies. She has led the drafting of the 5-year plan of Jiangsu Province 5 times and led multiple regional development research projects delegated by the national, provincial, and municipal governments, including the research on the strategy and initiatives for development of Yangtze River Economic Belt, and the research on major initiatives to promote higher quality integrated development of the Yangtze River Delta. Director Zhu led the Low Carbon City pilot program in Zhenjiang City. The program was so successful that Zhenjiang City was made a low carbon development demonstration city. Mayor Zhu introduced this program and their experience at the US-China Climate Leaders Summit. And in 2015, Director Zhu spoke at the 21st United Nations Paris Climate Change Conference. In 2018, she received the Blue Sky Award from the United Nations Industrial Development Organization and is the only recipient from China to have received this award. We're honored to have you here with us, Director Zhu, and thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge with us.
非常感谢主持人对我的介绍。首先，因为今天现在中国已经是中秋节了，所以祝大家中秋佳节快乐。布朗先生，不知道你还记不记得我？2017年你到江苏访问的时候，我作为江苏省发改委主任，我陪同过您，所以首先非常高兴见到那么多的老朋友，而且在气候界那么多的这个前辈。对我们中国的这个减排，对中国的应对气候变化，应该来说给了很多的这个指导。祝贺这个加州中国气候院成立2周年，因为在这个2周年当中，我的感觉，这个研究院做了很多的工作，为加州、为中国在推动应对气候变化当中成绩是非常之显著的。所以我们研究院是去年12月11号正式成立的。那么成立这个研究院的目的，就是为了落实习近平总书记提出的中国3060的目标。因为我在地方干过当过市长，把镇江从一个低碳的试点城市，就是大家都不太认识的低碳的一项工作，然后逐渐把它发展成为在镇江大家能够接受，能够形成共同的行动，来推动这个低碳城市的建设。所以我觉得这个研究院的成立，对当时的成立，对我在镇江的一些工作都提供了很好的一些帮助。那么我们去年这个研究院成立以来，我们重点实际上是2件事情，一件事情就是给地方政府提供施政方案，因为我们很多的地方政府，习近平总书记提出了3060的目标以后，实际上很多地方政府并不知道他们应该怎么去做，所以非常需要研究院、科研院所这样一些第三方机构来帮助他们找准路径，提供解决方案，找准路径，提供他们的施政方案。这是第一，对地方政府。第二，应对气候变化最终一定要落到企业层面，因为所有的排放不是是人类造成的，但是人类的生产活动造成的，所以在这个当中企业是主体，所以我们研究院的成立也是帮助企业一个一个企业有相同类型的企业提供他们的解决方案。所以我们在这个当中我们做的事情就是重点就是行动，所以从去年12月11号成立以来，我们开展了一系列的行动，帮助像南京、苏州等等这样一些地方政府提供他们的到碳达峰、碳中和的路径，明确他们的路径到底是什么，每一年要做什么阶段做什么事情，实现什么目标，最终实现净零。那么对于一些企业，比如说像钢铁、水泥、化工、建材等等这样一些企业，这些企业是未来是要围绕脱碳来进行他们的工艺改造、技术提升的。那么这些方面对于他们来说也都是非常之陌生，所以我们觉得我们的研究院就是联合大家一起来共同帮助他们提供这样一些解决的方案，然后帮助这些企业能够实现他们的这个3060的这个目标。所以这是我们研究院成立的这个宗旨。那么在这个过程当中，加州代凡主任我们是保持着非常热线的联系，比如说南京的碳达峰、碳中和的路径研究，在这个当中我们看过加州的一张图，那么这张图当中就表示出在某个年份1990年、2020年、2010年、2022、2020年、2030年、最后到2050年，它的新能源在什么时候达到什么样的比重，它的交通到未来是什么状况，电气化率达到多少，它的建筑是什么。我们当时看了这个图以后，我们就觉得，嘿，我们的城市应该怎么办？能不能做到这样的图？我们当时以为是不是我们把相关的数据搞清楚，拿到以后就可以实现拿到这样的图，但是后来我们发现我们做不了。为什么？因为实际上后来在深入了解以后，实际上我们知道这个里面是有一个用人工智能的算法，然后算出有一套模型，那么这个模型对于我们来说就特别的重要。所以我们在这个当中跟加州研究院，我们已经进行了3次的 这个面对面的视频的交流，他们在教会我们怎么来利用这个模型来实现按照你们所描绘的那样一种图景，把南京、苏州、昆山、像这个包头等等这样一些城市来找到我们研究院，帮他们来做路径的城市，把他们路径研究清楚。因为我觉得路径研究对这个非常之重要，所以我们觉得第一件事情，在中国来说，我们要把家底要摸清楚，到底我们的碳排放在哪里。我在镇江的时候，我们也做过这个事情。首先搭建了一个平台，用信息化的手段搭建一个平台，把路径搞清楚。第二个就是要明确措施，我们要干什么。然后第三个就是合力作为，大家应该怎么干。所以在这个当中共同推进印度气候变化工作。我觉得这个布朗州长，我说我特别的敬重您，您都已经这个一直在州长的岗位上面，退下来以后也一直在致力于这样一个低碳应对气候变化的这样一个工作。我觉得这是不仅仅是我们中美两国之间都是碳排放的大国，我们两国之间共同的责任，也是对人类的未来的发展是做一个造福人类的一件事情。所以我呢现在也是从即将退出这个政府的岗位，已经从政府，现在我在人大工作了，但是我觉得应对气候变化工作仍然是我终身追求的目标，来通过我自己的一些经验、一些这个成绩，包括联合大家共同来推动中国3060目标的如期实现。非常感谢大家给我这样一个机会，谢谢。
Thank you so much, Director Zhu. That was wonderful. Look forward to continued collaboration between our institutes. And our final introductory words will be from Eric DeCock. Eric was a former colleague of mine with the state of California. He is the Deputy Director for Planning and Community Development at the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research, which is a long-term planning entity for the state of California. In his role, Eric coordinates and supports his team's policy efforts on policy development, supporting local and regional planning, really with an eye towards how to meet the state's climate and environmental goals. Some of his key areas of focus include sustainable land use, housing, transportation, and infrastructure, community-based investment and social equity, public health, and environmental justice. So no small feat there, Eric. Eric has over 20 years of service of public, private, and non-sector planning experience. And so we look forward, Eric, to hearing about your work at OPR. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Louise. Good to see you, Governor Brown, and thanks to all at the Institute for inviting me and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research to be in the room today and to join this important conversation. Our office supports our current governor and serves the statewide, we do serve as a statewide planning agency where we do advise and guide on both statewide and local policy and planning matters, really trying to ensure that we're guiding our future growth and change for the future through the discipline of planning across the state. I've been working, as Louise mentioned, as a planner for over 20 years, and most of that time I worked in local government, either directly as a planner at an agency or in a consulting role to locals. And a majority focus of my career to date has been the integration of climate action into local government's work, especially through the lens of how we plan and how we build and transform our communities. And now in my role at the state, I do get to have the great opportunity to continue this work on policies and guidance to help advance the state's goals with a continued focus on the very important role of local planning and local climate action. From my perspective, and I think for OPR and the state as a whole, I think we can say that we do need all levels of government to play a strong role in addressing our climate crisis. First and foremost, this does need to always include local, city, and county action, and also regional leadership and on-the-ground action, making sure that our efforts are coordinated and aligned within regions as well. We feel local action is essential because of the application of many types of solutions that we see that are most effective to take action on climate, both for emissions and mitigation, and to adapt and become resilient to the effects of climate change. These are happening through major shifts in technology. It's happening through how we regulate the built environment, how and where we invest dollars to change the way that we operate in our communities. Ultimately, all of these solutions are implemented locally and very often at the city, county, or the regional level. The state can certainly fund new ideas, show extremely important leadership, providing that policy framework, but ultimately local communities must take action and be participants and partners in these programs. They're the ones that have to comply with the new rules and regulations and laws. So we see locals as having such an important role. In California and much of the United States, local governments have the authority to permit new construction. They have the authority to regulate land use. So these are very important regulatory actions that the state is watching. We can provide that oversight, but ultimately that activity is carried out in local communities. We recognize that there's such an important partnership and collaboration opportunity between state and local and government entities, but also across sectors as well. You know, local agencies conduct economic development activities, and they're very engaged in the way that our economies are functioning and how different sectors are aligning to make this work feasible. So local agencies do have these very deep connections as well with their communities. And we like to say that local government is where people really engage and show very active citizenship and participation in actual on the ground solutions. Sometimes in the climate policy world, we talk about the strong importance of the sticky behavior, the storytelling, the importance of learning and the ability to make informed choices as not just government officials, but also in helping to make informed choices as consumers and leveraging and accessing different incentives that are being offered by partners as we move these solutions forward. We also really tend to think of regional progress and prosperity in California. We want to make sure we have local and strong local and regional economies. Their health continue to be so critical to addressing our many ongoing challenges, including climate. And so we want to make sure that as we move towards a stronger future and we're addressing the climate crisis, we're doing this in a way that's fair and that's equitable and that really moves the needle on something we like to call just transition. Making sure that as we are transitioning away from fossil fuel, that we're moving in a way that prepares the workforce of the future to promote clean energy, to promote that zero carbon future. It really does begin with the workers, and we must make sure that this transition is fair and equitable across all of our regions and local economies in the state. At OPR, we continue to support state and local initiatives that promote best planning practice and policy that advances climate action and resilience. You know, urban and regional planning by nature is multidisciplinary, and there's so many intersectional opportunities given the breadth and the depth at which we need to slash our emissions, but also need to look at all the different ways that climate change is impacting us now, and how do we really think about ways through the planning lens, but also the implementation lens to become more resilient and cut our emissions down. So cities and counties do have this tremendous opportunity to lead that discussion. I mentioned the importance of land use authority, but we also have transportation and other built environment infrastructure investments that are so critical. And certainly the federal and the state governments in our country do play a leading role, and our regional entities help to plan and coordinate those investments. But we also really need local implementation to drive down the success of these climate investments through better investments in transit, walking, biking, clean water, more efficient systems, and even more importantly, how do we mitigate against the threats of things like wildfire, sea level rise, and flooding? These all require obviously very careful local planning to look at where the impacts can occur and where we can best leverage and align action. We are seeing so many great success stories at the local level in California through the work that local cities, counties, and regions are doing through their planning and their implementation. We know that already so many cities and counties have streamlined their permitting process to install renewable energy on homes, to install charging for electric vehicles. There's a streamlining act that went into effect years ago. We're seeing that well over 60 to 75% of cities are already well past that milestone and are aggressively helping on the permitting side, where locals have a lot of control under where those investments go. Back to the planning lens, nearly 50% of cities and counties in the state have already prepared a climate action plan. These aren't mandatory plans in California. They're optional plans, but they really do help communities leverage and align how they're going to plan and invest into climate friendly solutions. almost 75%, 80% or more of cities and counties are actually tracking their emissions and using best practices and protocols that have been put in place by a number of different important partners across the country. So we see that as a huge success. We're seeing a growing number of communities focusing on retrofitting their buildings, looking at how do we electrify and phase out natural gas in new construction? How do we introduce new technology like energy storage? Local governments are also strong actors and often leaders in how we collect and manage our solid waste. How do we provide water and wastewater to the different facilities? These are all very important local actions that cities and counties have critical roles. And last but not least, the role of our natural and working lands. You know, we can't see action on effective advancement of much more aggressive natural and working lands measures without land use planning and effective measures to institute planning and conservation. We can't, you know, our governor set out a bold vision and an executive order last year that set a goal for the state to conserve 30% of these lands by the year 2030. It is a very aggressive goal, but it will require a lot of partnership for local governments to address the land use needs and the factor of land use in making this a reality. The state continues to lead by example in setting forward really important actions. I think that's been said already, but you know, some of the things that OPR has done in partnership with numerous agencies as we've worked on a statewide climate adaptation strategy. We continue to partner with the California Air Resources Board on the important climate change scoping plan, the California climate investments. All of these plans, of course, serve really important frameworks by which our local and regional partners can take action. So we continue to do that work and driving forward, you know, best practices, tools, and guidance, and even funding programs that leverage all this great work. Particularly at OPR, we do have our Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program, or the ICARP program, which does provide guidance, and it's a forum for cross-sector input into how best to align policy incentives to advance the important work of climate adaptation and resilience in our state. Really important example of this work is the new Vulnerable Communities platform that the ICARP team is promoting. And this will be a really important tool to look at who is most impacted by climate and how do we prioritize the needs of our most vulnerable communities and center equity and how we empower local action. So these continue to be very important initiatives that OPR believes need to be central to the conversation as we look at how to best address and manage the climate crisis moving forward. I'll just close out my remarks by saying that I think climate knowledge exchange is so critical. We're excited to share information and learn, share what we're doing in California, but also learn what's happening in China at the subnational level and be part of this conversation. So with that, I'll wrap up my remarks and hand it back to you, Louise. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Eric. That was really helpful overview of all the work that's happening in California. I think now we're going to open it up and invite folks to put questions into the question and answer chat function on the Zoom. But maybe I will kick it off with some questions for all of our panelists to start some more conversation. Excuse me, and maybe I'll build off actually some, Eric, you ended with a number of discussion around what's happening on the adaptation and resilience front. And it does seem with the summer that has happened with flooding in Germany and China, the Hurricane Ida that swept up the east coast of the United States, the wildfires in California, the extreme heat that's been experienced in a number of places. I'm curious, especially maybe Taryn and Director Zhu, if you could speak at all of sort of what is happening at the subnational level in the groups that you're working with in the adaptation and resilience space and how you're seeing that that work moving forward, you know, and sort of how that is aligning or integrating with the work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Sure, I'm happy to kick off. You know, I think we take a multi-pronged approach. And so we have right alongside with our emissions reduction work streams, we are also working on resilience. And we actually call it natural working lands as well, modeled off California's program. As one of our founding members, we were able to model a lot off California. And we really look for opportunities for increased sequestration through soil health practices, through healthy forest practices, but also looking at the resilience side. You know, our communities, our states are the ones seeing these impacts on the front lines. In 2020, we had 22 weather events that occurred where costs exceeded $1 billion, shattering previous records. And so we're really seeing those firsthand impacts with our states. So we've seen a significant increase in the role of our states in resilience, and states are working more to collaborate across collaborate with each other about what that means. And that's from integrating resilience into their everyday work across and trying to break down the silos across the government. So it's not this afterthought that then is more costly and difficult to integrate, but is really embedded into the work they're doing. This is so important as we start to look to efforts with a more engaged federal government on infrastructure, and how can we build that infrastructure in a way that it is more resilient and more durable going forward. A key focus has been incorporating risk into state-owned infrastructure, and how can states lead by example and figure out how to measure resilience so we can assess projects and make the case for increased investment pre-disaster. So these are some of the things that we are working on. We're updating tools and resources. We have had a new governor's resilience playbook that was kind of a stepwise guide to how to start to tackle these challenging issues of resilience. That was released, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago, and that will be updated and released later this year. We're probably right around the COP. On our natural working lands efforts, I mentioned healthy soils, but also healthy forests. You know, we have a lot of Western states in our coalition, and the impacts of wildfires really cannot be understated, not only from a climate impact, but also from a public health and quality of life impact. And so we are partnering with the NGO sector to look at how can we increase our forest health, how can state policies help to accelerate or address that? How do we bridge the divide between state governments and federal governments in the West, where there's a lot of federal lands? So we're really trying to tackle some of these issues head on, and then also use our states as a test bed for what works and what doesn't work. And then what does work, let's accelerate that and let's scale that up to that federal level so that we can collaborate across jurisdictions and really move the needle on these things.
Great, thank you. And Director Zhu, I don't know if you have more you'd like to say about what's happening in China in this front.
谢谢。那个中国呢，可能我们的情况跟美国还不太完全一样。首先，第一个，在老百姓当中，在我们很多层面当中，认为自然灾害和气候变化是一个有关联性的事情呢，大家还不完全是一致的这样个认为。所以我们研究院在干什么？就在推动大家要提高这样一种认识。我们今天，比如说今年我们郑州的这个大水，有造成了300多人这个死亡，这么重大的一个事情，实际上它跟气候变化是有很大关联的，因为正是由于气候变化导致了像就是郑州这样一些地方出现了这个大水，所以这个是我们在致力在推动大家能够通过自然灾害，现在所面临的自然灾害与气候变化之间形成一种联系，让大家提高对应对气候变化的这样一种能力的认识，这是第一件事情。第二件事情呢，我刚才讲了，就是我们必须要我们应该怎么去做，这是很关键的事情。所以我们现在在干什么呢？第一件事情就是要大力发展新能源、可再生能源。因为中国呢，我们的这个煤炭占比还是比较高，火力发电当中，在电力当中， 火电的占比又是比较高。你像我们江苏那是更高了，所以在这个当中一定要讲我们的，就是这是问题的最核心的问题，就对于中国来说，减碳的最核心问题是能源问题，就是你的能源怎么能从现在以火电为主转变成可再生能源，这个是关键。所以我们在这个推动就是可再生能源的这个发展，在我们制定的一系列的方案当中，都明确他们可再生能源